Well, Elon Musk is at it again, adding some bon mot for us so that we can find out all about Tesla's full self-driving progress and how things are going. And what's really interesting is how he explains how Tesla is approaching full self-driving perfection. And basically, it's not really a straight line, it's more of a zigzag, and that proves really interesting to how full self-driving and really artificial intelligence training works overall. So let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All coming to you from Manhattan Beach, California, where I will be for the next month and visiting my brother. This is our place. We've been all over the place. We were at his house for a couple of days, then we were up in Santa Barbara for a couple of days, got to watch the SpaceX launch from Vandenberg on, I think it was Friday night, maybe it was Thursday night. Anyway, it was very, very cool watching it go up. We were actually able to see it. And anyway, now back at our place, which is actually in Longdale, which is about 2 miles from SpaceX headquarters. So anybody who works for SpaceX, if you would like to give me an interview or just go grab coffee or something like that, let me know, because I would love to go, just say hi. Anyway, without further ado, let's turn to what Sawyer Merritt posted here, which unfortunately I don't have access to my Tesla right now, so I don't have access to this. But Tesla's full self-driving supervised version 12.4.2 has started to roll out to employees, and I believe it's actually going out to the wider public right now as well, because I'm starting to see some first drives pop up from people. So that's interesting in its own right, partially because of the delay, because this has taken quite a while for 12.4.x to get to us public out here instead of the chosen few test drivers and so forth. But for our purposes today, it's Elon Musk's response to this that's really, really critically important. He says, "Sorry for the delay. This release had far fewer interventions, but suffered in driving smoothness. Part of the issue was too much training on interventions and not enough on normal driving. It's like a doctor training too much on patients in the emergency room versus training on preventive care. Our next-gen AI model after this has a lot of promise, approximately 5x increase in parameter count, which is very difficult to achieve without upgrading the vehicle inference computer." So a lot to break down here, and then Elon actually responds to a really good post from Cern Basher, and I will get to that in just a minute. But first, let's break down what he says here. So he says, "Sorry for the delay," obviously that's obvious. "The release had far fewer interventions," which means that there are fewer times that the human had to take over, "but suffered in driving smoothness," which I assume means that it was doing that lane change. People are talking about the lane change dance, where it was going back and forth between lanes. Might have accelerated or braked a little bit too severely, but I think it was more along the lines of just the lane dancing. People were very, very frustrated with that. And then we get to the really interesting stuff. Part of the issue was too much training on interventions and not enough on normal driving. So here's the problem. Tesla has been training on normal driving, right? The 99% of the time when you're just driving, nothing big deal is happening and you're going along. And then they were like, well, how do we train for these weird little edge cases and things like that? You know, the place where like there's a truck in the middle of an intersection, you have to go around it, or there's an emergency vehicle coming, or a tree fell on the road, or whatever those kinds of things are. So they were privileging that information and skewing the training data heavily towards that. But the problem is, obviously, if you do that too much, you're going to bias the data towards the crazy scenarios and not towards the normal scenarios, which means that the car is going to behave a little bit more like it's in a crazy scenario all the time. You might consider this something like a person who has high anxiety levels or something. They're constantly at, alert level, and so they can't just sort of live kind of a normal, calm existence. They're always just like this all the time. So the car, I think, was kind of like that. The car had the full self-driving equivalent of too much cortisol in its system. It was just kind of always up here at 11. That's a guess because, of course, I haven't been able to drive 12.4, but from the people that were able to drive it, it did sound like it had some behavior that was like that. It was a little skittish, a little hyperactive, things like that. So that could come from too much training on those kind of crisis scenarios and not enough on just normal driving. And that's what Elon says. He says it's like a doctor training too much on patients in the emergency room versus training on preventive care, which is great if you're an emergency room doctor, but not so good if you're a primary care physician. You don't want to be a primary care physician and constantly be going like, oh my gosh, there's some trauma going on. It's like an episode of House or something, rather than just like, oh, it's just a cold, here, have some pills or whatever and go home and you'll be fine in the morning.
More on that in a minute, but first, with AI potentially lengthening our lifespans by decades, it's even more important than ever for us all to take care of our skin to keep it looking and feeling healthy no matter our age. The trouble is, I'm no skincare expert, and that's why today's sponsor, Geology, is a great skincare partner. They have scientifically created a number of skincare solutions based on your own unique age, skin type, and other factors. You take a simple quiz, and Geology's smart algorithms determine what you need for optimal skincare. I'm care routine number 30, and it's great for my skin. Geology is scientifically based, built around proven ingredients, trusted by dermatologists, and people love geology. It's gotten over 10,000 five-star reviews and turned many a skeptic into a believer. And best yet, geology is simple, efficient, and very effective. Take their quiz, get your personalized skincare routine mailed directly to you, follow their super simple instructions in the morning and at night, and get better, younger looking skin in no time. And just for you, my viewers, Geology is offering an amazing 70% off their skincare trial set. Be sure to click my link below to get this amazing deal, or feel free to check them out at Target or on Amazon. I love Geology because it's powered by facts, not fads. It's a simple-to-use routine designed just for you and built around just a handful of powerful, proven ingredients that have been trusted by dermatologists for decades. So what are you waiting for? Be sure to take the Geology quiz and save 70% off your skincare trial set. And now let's get back to it.
So that's interesting in its own right, but then this last paragraph, he kind of gives us a just one more thing, which is really, really interesting. Our next-gen AI model after this has a lot of promise, so that's cool. So I would assume that's 12.5 or maybe 12.6. Approximately 5 times increase in parameter count, which is very difficult to achieve without upgrading vehicle inference computer. So, if you don't know, our vehicles have, most Teslas out there on the road right now have hardware 3 or so called. The newer cars have hardware 4 in them, which is substantially better. It has a lot more memory, a lot more compute power, etc. But I assume that what Elon is talking about here without upgrading vehicle inference computer is basically hardware 3. And hardware 3 has been around, I believe it went into production or into cars starting in early 2019, if I'm remembering correctly. So we're talking about, 5-year-old stuff. And then of course it was developed a couple of years before that, taped out, put into mass production. So we're looking at like a 2017-ish kind of design. So it's pretty remarkable that a computer like that is still able to work at all. But when you look at increasing the size of the parameter count by 5x, and I'm going to get back to that in just a second, what exactly that means, because that actually tails into CERN's post. But when you get to that sort of 5x increase in parameter count, it becomes really difficult both on the memory front and on the computation front. All right, with that in mind, let's turn to CERN's response to this. He says, a parameter is like a setting that the AI adjusts to learn from data and make decisions. Each parameter holds a bit of information that the AI uses to understand patterns and generate outputs. The more parameters an AI model has, the more detailed and nuanced its understanding and outputs can be. Think of parameters as dials on a control panel. Each one is tweaked during the AI's training to help it get better at predicting and creating new data that looks like the original training examples. And then Elon responds to that, yeah, so long as the information compression efficiency is held reasonably constant, a higher parameter count is a representation of how well it understands the nuances of reality. So let's look at CERN's post and then Elon's response to it and then my response to all of that stuff in a little bit more detail. So a parameter is just literally a number. Sometimes it could be a vector or something like that, but you could think about it as just a float number like pi, 3.1415, right? That could be a parameter for something. Now, a parameter generally varies. It's not a constant like pi, but you know what I'm saying. It's just a number. And the number of parameters that you have in a neural network is critical to how a neural network can work. So a neural network in general is an arbitrary function approximator. What does that mean? It means you could approximate something like a sine wave or something like that, right? Something like this. You could approximate that function with a neural network with enough parameters. What those parameters are, again, are numbers. And what you do is you put them all in a giant spreadsheet. It's actually a multi-dimensional spreadsheet. It's called a tensor. But if you've heard about tensors before, that's all it is. It's just a spreadsheet on steroids. It's like a spreadsheet, but in multiple other dimensions as well as just 2 dimensions. So anyway, these parameters are just numbers in this giant box of numbers. And what you do is you take some input, you put it into that, multiply all of these things, do some addition, it's just matrix math, and then out the other end comes something like a dog or a cat or turn right 3 degrees or whatever that output that you're interested in is. And during the training process, what you're doing is you're tuning all of these numbers. You're just adjusting the amount of these numbers, raising some, lowering others, and it's done through gradient descent and backpropagation. And if you're interested in that, I've actually done a bunch of videos on that, so definitely check those out up here. But in general, that's all it's doing is it's just multiplying and adding, multiplying and adding. It's doing a whole bunch of that stuff, and it's got to do it very, very efficiently, and it's got to learn all of the correct weights so that things get activated. Like when you see a stop sign, there may be a whole bunch of these neurons or parameters that get activated when the cameras see a stop sign, and it has to then react to that, and maybe the brake gets pressed or something along those lines in order for it to brake. So that's all it's doing. The problem with this is that we're not talking about 20 of these numbers, we're talking about billions of these numbers, up to over trillions of these numbers for large language models right now. So there's a lot of these numbers. And what you need is a lot of these numbers, because just a tiny little subsection of those is for stop signs, for example. Then there's other sections of it for road markings. There's other sections for just what is a road. There's other sections for like trees and buildings, because it's got to be able to ignore that stuff. It doesn't want to really pay attention to things like that, but it's got to know what they are so that it cannot pay attention. And then of course, important things like cars and people and stuff like that. So all of the parameters, all of these numbers and these giant tensors, little pieces of each one of those things are for each kind of object, and yes, they will interact with each other, but you know, in a sense, it's like the way a human works. And I don't want to get too over the top about this, because humans work differently than computers. But you know, it's just like as a person learns, you see a red octagon with some letters across it and your brain goes stop sign. You don't really have to think about it that much. So same basic kind of idea that we've got here in these neural networks. They get trained up so that part of that neural network just deals with stop signs. And so the important part here is the more of these neurons you have, the more of these parameters you have, the more nuanced Tesla's full self-driving's version of reality is. It's able to understand reality better. And that's where we get to Elon's response to this. Yeah, so long as the information compression efficiency is held reasonably constant. So what these things are, I call them an arbitrary function approximator, but what they also are is they're a compression thing. They're like what humans do. Humans compress information. We don't store all the information in the universe. We can't. So we're really good at compressing things. So what Elon is saying is, as long as that efficiency of compression remains reasonably constant, as you increase the number of parameters, what you're going to do is get a model that understands reality better. It's going to understand the nuances. Maybe it can understand the difference between a stop sign that's on a street and a stop sign that's on a billboard, and a stop sign that's in a person's hand that's held down or versus held up or something, right? Those are nuances on stop sign. Stop sign is stop sign is stop sign. But one on a billboard you want to ignore because it's just, you know, like stop, the police will get you or something, right? You know, it's an advertisement. Whereas a stop sign on a road, you really better pay attention to. You don't want to blow through that. Whereas a stop sign that's upside down held in a person's hand is likely not being utilized at that point. If it's held upright, it is being utilized. So these are all nuances on the concept of stop sign, and you need more parameters in order to break that apart and understand reality in more nuanced fashion. So then let's end with my response to Elon here. In other words, a high parameter count is not necessarily the end-all and be-all of deep neural networks. You have to maintain high efficiency in the neural network in terms of its understanding of the world. For Tesla full self-driving, this would be its world model, or its understanding of how photons in lead to control outputs for steering, braking, acceleration out. Full self-driving is in a way like humans. We don't know everything to drive. What type of rock is that pebble over there? What type of cloud is that? What sort of slurry was that concrete curb made from? You know, we don't need to know any of that kind of stuff. In fact, what we need to know is to ignore all of that. We don't want to know about that, because that's not what we're doing when we're driving. What we need to do is know enough to do it efficiently, in other words, driving efficiently, which is compression efficiency. Likewise, full self-driving has to learn to ignore like 99% of the world and then compress the remaining 1% efficiently to be able to drive properly. This is not at all a trivial matter, which is why full self-driving often zigzags toward the solution, in other words, perfect driving, which gets back to that original post about, you know, the kind of zigzagging, the going from lane to lane and all of that kind of stuff, and Elon talking about how they trained too much on emergent situations, on, you know, kind of emergency situations or critical situations, not enough on normal ones. That can cause some backtracking in terms of the way the neural network behaves under normal circumstances. So, you know, we humans are attempting to program these neural networks and do it well, but it's one of those things where it's going to go like this. It's going to kind of act like a dolphin going up and down rather than being a perfectly linear march towards perfect driving. As I said here, in general, if you have the compute power, i.e. speed, and memory, in other words, the gigabytes of RAM, and efficiency remains the same for a larger neural network, which was what Elon was talking about above, then you get big benefits out of more parameters. It allows a system like full self-driving to create a more complex, nuanced world model, which means it can drive more like a human, and someday soon better than any human. So in general, the benefits are very, very significant to getting more parameters into a model. The problem, of course, as Elon noted, is that these computers are, they're locked in. They're 7-year-old designs approximately and about 5-year-old computers. So they're locked into what they have, and being able to squeeze 5 times more parameters. Let's say that there was 1 billion parameters in the old model, just arbitrarily. I don't know what the answer is, but let's say there was 1 billion. Now you've got 5 billion. It's not just storing 5 billion parameters in this model in memory in your car, because of course it all has to run in real time in edge compute, but it's also being able to compute that efficiently. You've got to do 5 times more computations, or potentially way more than 5 times more computation. So there's a lot more stress on the compute power in order to get that 5 times more parameters. Although it sounds like Tesla, their engineers are just incredible. I don't know how they do this stuff, how they're so efficient, but it sounds like they've been able to make it work. And so the next version, 12.5 or 12.6 of this software, will be substantially better because it's going to have a lot more neurons in it, a lot more parameters, and it's going to be able to understand the world better. All right, so that's what I've got for you today. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments. If you have some insights into all of this, I would love to know about that. And of course, while you're down there, if you don't mind liking and subscribing, that really helps out the channel. Thank you all so much. And finally, a big thanks once again to Geology for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link in the description to get 70% off your skincare trial set. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.